Might wanna buckle up, baby.
Punch, and I'm Jacob, and welcome to Lightspeed. Will the sequel trilogy age like the prequel trilogy? This is a question that I've heard a lot as of late, with the sequel trilogy's biggest haters claiming that the trilogy will never age the same way as something like the prequels. With the sequel trilogy's biggest defenders, myself included, claiming that Star Wars ages better with time for the most part, and that it's undeniable that the sequel trilogy will ultimately do the same. So that begs the question, who exactly is in the right here? And will the sequel trilogy actually age better with time? And the answer is yes. But also no, let me explain. Time is absolutely a massive factor at play here, as although the prequel trilogy did have its fans in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of critics and other people found these films to be initially inferior to the original trilogy. A lot of die-hard prequel fans these days try to act like those movies were always loved by the fans, but if you go back to any message board or review aggregator website, you'll find more mixed responses to those movies around the time of their initial releases, especially for episodes 1 and 2. Obviously, I'm not saying that critic review sites are the gospel of film criticism. It's definitely important, but I'm in the camp that believes that no opinion on a movie, show, or other form of entertainment media is more important than your own personal one. Mainstream prequel revisionism is still a fairly new concept, starting with memes around 2015 and really taking off from 2017 and onwards. With these movies gaining more of an appreciation, partially because the people that watched these movies when they were younger kids finally grew up and voiced their opinions on why George's prequel trilogy meant a lot to them growing up. And I do believe that this pattern will eventually come full circle for the sequel trilogy as well. It's hard to believe, but next year is actually the 10th anniversary of The Force Awakens, and despite a lot of hate that I see online, I've surprisingly seen a lot of excitement to celebrate what was the start of the sequel trilogy back in 2015. Kids that were 10 and watched The Force Awakens in theaters are now entering their 20s, and I'm sure that they will eventually reach a point to start defending the sequel trilogy online in the same exact way that fans of the prequel trilogy did all those years ago. Honestly, and a lot of people are going to deny this in the comments, but I've already kind of seen it on both Twitter and Reddit. I'm really hoping that December 2025 celebrates The Force Awakens in a massive way, in the same way that I'm sure that May 2025 will be a massive celebration for Revenge of the Sith. However, there's still a major factor here that we haven't yet discussed that was a massive part in changing the public's perception on the prequel trilogy overall as a whole. Expanded material. The prequel trilogy is iconic partially because just how fleshed out that era is, and how well developed the characters in that era are. Even the clone troopers. This is because there's so much material that connects directly to that era of Star Wars, like books, comics, toys, and more. But most notably, the Clone Wars animated series that began in 2008. In case you've been living under a rock, the Clone Wars is a 7-season animated series about everything that takes place in between episodes 2 and 3, and wasn't just a massive part of further developing the prequel trilogy, but also keeping the Star Wars fandom alive and well for like the better part of a decade. It also helped to answer a lot of questions or complaints that fans had with that specific trilogy at the time. Questions that people don't even talk about anymore. And for what it's worth, even though it's no longer canon, I can't forget to mention the 2003 Clone Wars micro series. It was great too, and kind of did the same thing before the release of Revenge of the Sith. And here is where we run into a conundrum, because the sequel trilogy doesn't have that kind of expanded material yet. There's no Clone Wars type series for the sequel trilogy, although we've seen a few ideas from those films utilized in series like The Mandalorian, The Bad Batch, and even Ahsoka. We don't have a show that fully fleshes out characters like Rey, Finn, Poe, Rose, or the Age of Resistance as a whole. Okay, yeah, there's Star Wars Resistance, which has its highs and lows, and it does take place during that era, but that show has been off the air for almost 5 years now. Aside from that, and only a handful of books, comics, and even toys now for that matter, this trilogy hasn't really had the opportunity to be directly developed further in the years since its release. And whether you love or hate these movies, there's no denying that as a Star Wars fan, That's incredibly disappointing. Some people will probably chalk it up to, oh, the movies were bad and the toys don't sell. To which I say 2 of those movies received critical acclaim, with the other getting extremely mixed reviews at worst. And all of those movies broke over $1 billion each, so that's not the problem and doesn't really make sense to me personally. Instead, I think it's due to how expansive the Star Wars universe really is, and how endless the opportunities for storytelling in this galaxy are as well. It's great to know that Star Wars is at a place as a franchise where we can seamlessly jump across different eras with a multitude of different projects. I do love that we can see the flaws of the New Republic era and how the Empire is relying on dark magic and secrets only the Sith knew to try to resurrect their tyranny, in some cases purely metaphorical and in other cases quite literally. However, the problem here is that we're kind of skipping over an era. Like, we haven't seen really any of the characters from the sequel trilogy specifically since like 2019. I'm glad the universe is expansive. It's one of my favorite things about Star Wars. However, there's no denying that the time during and after the sequel trilogy has remained pretty vacant. I know that we have an upcoming Rey movie about the new Jedi Order. That sounds interesting. That's probably the Star Wars project that I'm most looking forward to. However, we still have a lot of time before that project comes out, and without more expansive material from this era, the trilogy is kind of remaining as its own thing for the time being. Which is totally fine. I mean, you can watch all of those movies on their own as is. Same with the originals, same with the prequel trilogy. But much like with the originals, and especially with the prequels, I would like to see more stories about these characters and this era, and the ones that I have read have all been mostly fantastic for what it's worth. As more stories are told to flesh out and develop this era and its characters, there's no denying, in my personal opinion, that we'll definitely reach a point where the sequel trilogy has become an iconic piece of Star Wars media. It already kind of is iconic, for better or for worse, depending on who you ask, but I think it's going to become more beloved as time goes on regardless. And I'm sure that the worst people in the fandom will go on to hate whatever is new and will claim that it ruined the franchise. Ooh, should I keep that in? People are going to get mad about it in the comments, but it's the truth. I'm going to keep it in. That being said, what do you think of the sequel trilogy? Are you a fan of it? Are you not a fan of it? Do you think it's going to age as well as the prequels? Let me know down in the comments below. I also have a link to my Discord server linked in the description below, so if you want to talk Star Wars, feel free to join that. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and until the next video, may the Force be with you.